Hello and welcome to Changemakers with me, Michael Heyman. Today I'm joined by Kate Willard, the government-appointed envoy for the Thames Estuary and a champion of fair growth. Now this is a story of finding your life path and using it to make a difference. From school days to the arts, from the Iron Curtain to the stage of public life. It's a masterclass in how to get things done, and with it, the story of fair growth. Kate, welcome to Changemakers. So good to see you. Now,
thank you.
Let's start with the job description. It's a great one. Government envoy to the Thames Estuary. I mean, what's the spec on a job description like that?
So look, I've got the best job in the world, yeah? The Thames Estuary. Imagine you're standing on the top of St Paul's Cathedral, you're looking east, you go out to Southend on the Essex coast, out to Ramsgate on the Kent coast. We are 1,000 square miles. We're 4 million people. At its beating heart, you have the Thames, a landscape that inspired Canaletto, Turner, Dickens, and multiple others. And it's our job, in a nutshell, to deliver 1.3 million jobs, because that's the strategic potential, million homes, strategic potential, and 190 billion GVA.
Right.
So it's a big old job.
Big old job.
But it's a chunky old landscape to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to be honest. I mean, government envoy. It sounds fantastic. I mean, but before we go more into that, let's introduce a sliding doors moment, because your life could have been very different to that. You know, if you go back, I'm thinking about the Kate Willard at school. Who's thinking about life, and she's going to go on to become to explore acting. Is going to explore theatre. Is going to spend time in countries that are changing, the Soviet Union, which is going to become Russia, Eastern European countries that are going to go from communism to capitalism. You're going to be at these points of great change, these moments of change, these sliding doors, if you will. Let's talk about the acting career, because I could be talking to Kate Willard, accepting her first Oscar.
Highly unlikely, but thank you for that confidence. Yeah, I was from Hertfordshire. I went to school in Hertfordshire, and I was always fascinated by the theatre. I remember, this is a terrible thing to remember, but when I was back about 5, I remember sitting in a pantomime, and I was in about the 4th row back, and I remember working out the quickest way to get to the stage. And I was going to push everyone out my way to get up on the stage and sing the song with, Jack and the Beanstalk.
So what drew you to that? Because a lot of people think, I want to be on that stage, and a lot of people think, I'd rather die. So what's the urge, do you think?
At that young age, I don't know. I think later on, it was because I think there was shit I wanted to say.
Right.
So that's always been kind of quite important. But, I wanted to be an actress all the way through school, and I had a very interesting experience in the sixth form. We had these things called, I don't know what you call it, like lifestyle lessons or something like that. They don't do them now, I hope. They were dreadful things. Where in these lifestyle lessons, they either taught you how to marry well or to go to Oxbridge. And that was the 2 routes. And obviously I was already in school not quite understood, because I was being very clear that I wanted to be an actress. And we had this one lifestyle lesson. Mrs. Waits was taking it. She was domestic science teacher. Dreadful woman. She was teacher. The whole sixth form were there.
Mrs. Waits isn't listening.
I think that's impossible. She was old even at that time, and I'm very old now. Mrs. Waits was taking it, and Mrs. Waits looked at, bear in mind the fact the whole sixth form were there, right? I was like 17. It's quite a sensitive time. And Mrs. Waits said, she said, girls, you can have a successful life, work hard, apply yourselves, be successful, be happy, blah, blah, blah. So I'm sitting there thinking, she could be talking about me. And then she says, or you could turn out like Catherine Willard.
Right. Okay. So that's not the most motivating moment.
No, genuinely. I went to the bathroom and I washed my face, and I thought one of 2 things is going to happen. Either I'm going to go back and punch Mrs. Waits, or I'm going to walk out from school and never go back again. I did the latter. Don't know if I've done the former, but I did the latter. So I genuinely have no qualifications. I don't have shit qualifications. I have none.
No.
But Mrs. Waits set me on the path to self-belief.
Well, I was going to say, she probably gave you the biggest qualification in life, which is to actually believe that there was a journey you could start on. And you took that step.
I did.
Into the performing arts. And did you love it, or did you have
I absolutely loved it.
Right.
It was one of the, you have no money. So basically you work in pubs,
right?
Obviously. I was doing lots of agitprop, very political theatre, so I was very politically motivated and politically interested. So it was all kind of wildly, slightly anarchic and beautiful. I had some of the happiest, most creative but hardest working times, because you'd have to, you work in pubs. And I think the first proper job I ever had was as a travel agent on Baker Street. Like when you used to write out with hand air tickets. So you work really hard, but ultimately beautifully satisfying and something. If ever I speak to any young people, I always encourage people to think about theatre, drama, the arts, because I think it gives you so many core skills.
So I'm thinking you got the gift of expression in terms of actually exploring your political beliefs, your creative ability. You found purpose, but also I suppose you also got a sense of the reality of life. You're working hard. You're involved in things. You're doing, and sort of thinking, if you think about yourself now, and you think about, I suppose, those superpowers, how do they manifest today in terms of the skills they give you?
So I think, all of the things you said, I think are absolutely right. But I think there's one that people forget sometimes, which is if you learn to be an actress in whatever way. I actually served an apprenticeship, so I made the tea for 3 years at the Theatre of Stratford East, which was fantastic. I was very, very lucky. Is it doesn't just teach you how to express yourself. First and foremost, it teaches you how to listen.
Right.
Because you can't be a competent actor on a stage without listening to the audience and listening to their every breath, every nuance in your fellow actors.
So you're picking up mood, you're picking up body language, you're picking up...
And that makes you effective as a communicator. And I think if I think now in the kind of growth place that we are and the work that I do, it's not just my ability to be able to be compelling, which I need to be sometimes, or inspirational, which you need to be, or whatever. But actually, I think I can read mood music. I can read a room. I can read a people. You don't always get it right. Yeah. But I just think that was a really big skill that I learned.
That's very interesting, because I think, when I've spoken to people about you, they'll say, well, Kate can see around corners, as in is very good in a room in terms of understanding audience, understanding those sorts of, I suppose, things you're talking about in terms of the qualities of people that may not be what they say, but actually what they're thinking and how they are responding. And I suppose how you observe that is an interesting skill.
It is. And in fact, sometimes my kids joke that I would be hung as a witch if I was born at a different time, because there's something it sounds like a little bit mystic, doesn't it? And obviously it's not remotely fucking mystic. It's practical. But it does mean that I think you are listening, and in the growth place, particularly when you talk about fair growth and delivering fair growth, that your ability to move forward must be informed by your ability to hear.
But I suppose also spotting the joins, which moves us on to the experience you had, the very unique experience that you had at a period of time in the 80s and the early 90s, where Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union was in this incredible period of change and flux. And I think unless you actually lived through it, it's hard to explain that we all grew up in an era where things were seen as a given. There was an iron curtain. Yeah. It was never going to change. And then it changed so quickly. Yeah. And you were involved in the creative arts expression at a time where expression was suddenly being freed up. I mean, pick up the story for us in terms of what was the vibe like? What was it all about?
So it was extraordinary. I was lucky enough to be awarded a Churchill Fellowship in the mid-80s, and I went to Hungary. I'd been to Hungary to take a youth theatre show there in the early 80s. In the mid-80s, I went back and studied community theatre there. Right. And obviously the kind of it was still Soviet at that point.
So explain what that means. So in terms of the experience, the vibe. So to be Soviet when you're there in Hungary, what?
So Hungary was a very particular place because it was obviously the sort of the softest part of the border, and it always was. And therefore it was a very particular experience. But it was, obviously though it was very regimented, you had to register with the police, and you had to register with the police every, other day, and you had to register if you moved. So there was a sort of a real element of control there. But obviously, Hungary, a land of poets and playwrights and artists, so beautifully creative. And also just kind of, practically speaking, remember I'm at this point, I haven't got any money or anything. I was always skin. And, there was the Munkash. I was back in Budapest this weekend, actually, and talking about the Munkash cigarette, which was the workers' cigarette. And they were about fucking like 2p a packet or something. Right. So very cheap to live there at that time, because obviously it was kind of Soviet. So, but it was a beautiful experience. And through Hungary, with dear friends and extended family who I still have there, went to so many other parts of Central and Eastern Europe, predominantly smuggled in the boot of a trabant because it was easier than trying to get across the normal passport. You used to just have to have 200 Marlborough on your chest, and if they opened the boot of the trabant, you just give it, and then it was like having a passport, sort of.
And it was an incredible and ultimately futile effort to try and monitor everybody at a time where actually a lot of the sort of like I suppose the shutters were coming down. I mean, I can remember because we were just talking off air. I worked on a Foreign Office program called the Know-How Fund, and hotel rooms that were bugged or these sorts of things that were all part of the experience. But of course, ultimately, these were sort of regimes that were going to go very, very quickly, and of course, they all went sort of within 2 or 3 years. The landscape had changed completely. But it's also a time where people found phenomenal levels of enthusiasm and hope and optimism about change, wasn't it? I mean, in terms of that kind of the vibe, I guess.
It was. I mean, again, going back to Hungary, it was tremendously exciting. I remember, we'd be sitting up late at night with a bottle of palinka and talking about politics and the sort of hope and brightness that was on the horizon, ironically with Fidesz, and, roll on X number of years. And obviously Hungary is in a very specific political situation right now, which is very, very fucking challenging, And I think what we have to recognise is that, well, I think everybody knows this shit. Walls come down, but balance and democracy and kind of fairness takes longer to settle than that.
And I suppose, given your work in regeneration that was going to come, I'm still thinking about, creative arts as an influence, but also, I suppose, the change and the hopes and dreams of people were early experiences that were going to become quite useful. I'm thinking again, what do you take out of that experience in terms of today's case?
I think I'm going to go back to this listening piece. I think there's something about, and again, if you sort of go back to the sort of worst excesses of regeneration and growth in the 80s and 90s, where poor communities, and I remember sort of looking at all the work that's done around cultural quarters in the early 90s, where schemes were done to poor people. Mm-hmm. And there was that sense of sort of benign and benevolent regeneration, which made a set of presumptions about what people living in poverty wanted and or needed and or had a right to. And I think maybe there was something about that Soviet experience which was about people not being listened to and not having the authority and the voice that was listened to. And therefore, for me, that listening piece is still very, very important.
Right. Now, it strikes me that in your career, there have been people that have been influential. We've heard about one in a negative way. Well, and a negative that then turns into a positive.
She was a cow.
Gives you the grit in the oyster.
Yeah, she did.
Right?
She did.
Somebody else that we both know. I've interviewed Michael Heseltine on the show. I've worked for one of his members of parliament that on the speechwriting side. Loved it. Really enjoyed it. But I also see that he was an incredible influence on your work, on the work of the Thames Estuary, and actually on the whole devolution agenda. I mean, pick out the story of him and maybe other people that have influenced what you've done and what you've ultimately become.
So I think Michael Heseltine is an absolutely fabulous example, and he's also, because obviously he's a Conservative politician, but he's kind of transcended that with his greatness. And I remember the work that he did in Liverpool, and he's, to my knowledge anyway, and I did a lot of work in Liverpool previously, is the only Conservative politician that gets a standing ovation wherever he goes in Liverpool. And that's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's because he went to Liverpool and didn't listen to what he had been told about Liverpool. He didn't listen to what people thought was happening in Toxteth in L8. He went and he listened. And I remember, because randomly I was working there at the time, so my history with him goes as far back as that.
Yeah.
But he came in and he listened, and he did really, really sensible, pragmatic stuff, which means that he and continues to do really pragmatic and sensible stuff to this day. So for me, he was and remains an inspiration in a sort of beautifully apolitical and sensible way.
And I think that experience in Liverpool genuinely moved him. I don't think it was just about him coming to do something to Liverpool. I think Liverpool
you can't
did something.
Make that shit up.
Liverpool did something to him, right?
Yeah.
So let's now take that and maybe in a Thames Estuary perspective, is that you are involved in something which is deeply personal. It's about people's lives. It's about people's opportunity. It's more that, I mean, sometimes I think words like regeneration, and they sit up here and they're almost devoid of the meaning of what it really means. To make a difference.
Yeah, regeneration is a horrible word, topped only by placemaking, which I fucking hate, with even more venom. Because essentially what we're about is making shit better,
right,
for people. In whatever way that means. On the Thames Estuary, we've done a huge amount of work. Do you know that there are people on the Thames Estuary who are dying as young as anywhere in the UK as a direct result of the fact that they are in poverty, dying too young because of poverty. That's fucking mental. And it's also unacceptable. And what that means is that with the Thames Estuary Growth Board, whilst we are, of course, we're doing regeneration and net zero and housing and infrastructure and all the kind of all that stuff that you would expect us to do, but we will make sure that it is done fairly, because there is a presumed link between investment and people coming out of poverty. So if you throw money at it, somehow this magic fucking fairy dust comes in overnight, and the next day poverty is eradicated, and it's all absolutely marvellous. And we know that doesn't happen. We've seen it. You will have seen it time and time again. Different cities, different countries, different places. It doesn't. You do same old shit, you'll get same old shit.
Yeah.
And if we're looking at entrenched historical deprivation and poverty, people have been doing same old. And we don't do that on the estuary.
So you've got to do things that are different, experimental. They involve risk, but they also involve great opportunity. You've got to, I mean, I'm thinking about that sort of the Einsteinism of, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over again and expect a different result.
Yeah.
Tell us about the outcomes. Tell us about actually the work you're doing in terms, because I'm not thinking about this just in terms of economic growth. I'm thinking about this in terms of people growth, social growth, cultural growth.
Yeah.
I mean, just because growth is the subject, right? I mean, the Prime Minister talks about growth as the number one mission in the country, the one that supplants all else. What's your take on it?
So I'm really old school here. So there's lots has been written about the Thames Estuary and about growth and regeneration, of course, sort of generally across country, across the world. But actually, a lot of what we're finding on the estuary, it just comes down to people. So at the moment, I am chairing 8 what we call delivery accelerators, and that's me dropping into a jargon that I bloody hate. But anyway, let's go on round tables then. I'll get
things are going to go faster.
That we call the idea is that you're making stuff go faster. Be that an investment, be that a build, be that a kind of conciliatory agreement between two warring planning functions, whatever it is. And, you can, I haven't got a particular down on consultants, but, you can commission all the fucking work you like. But 9 times out of 10, what it comes down to is getting the 4 or 5 people around the table that are either dicking around or just ill-informed or just haven't come to the right conclusion. And I take
and those 4 or 5 people are what? The decision makers?
Fucking decision makers.
Right, okay.
And I've got a really, really big stick and I've got a really big bag of sweets.
And we were talking about decisions and decisiveness as being actually quite rare things to see in terms of actually the ability to actually just make a decision, run with it, do it. I mean, does the sort of environment where you've got a very specific set of circumstances like the Thames Estuary, where in a way it's kind of like do it or don't, invest or don't, does that make it a bit more binary and a bit less complicated, or is it still the same jumble of issues that you have to deal with to actually get things done?
I think it's probably the same jumble of issues because every situation is different, which is why I kind of think if you look at the growth agenda broadly across the UK, I don't think that there is a singular model that fits all sizes. We all need to sort of bend to the circumstance in front of us. But I think in terms of that sort of ability to make a decision, I said to you earlier, I can make a decision on a fucking sixpence, and I do. And my team, who, by the way, are the best team I've ever had in my entire life, and as I said, I'm very old now, my team know that I will make a decision, and they'll also know that sometimes, I'm not going to say quite often, but sometimes it's wrong. It's I've either decided something very stupid or wrong.
So is that gut instinct? that you,
gut,
Gut.
gut. Every time. I mean, it doesn't mean I don't listen to evidence. Obviously, I do. But like, it's gut. But what it means is, if someone says that's a stupid idea, I'll go, oh yes, fuck, sorry, let's do something quite different. But what it means is, at the end of every day, we've moved forward.
Right.
We might have gone forward 3 steps and back half a step, but we've moved forward, which means we're like, when the government talks about accelerating growth, one of the first places I would look at a local level is the ability to make a decision and then act on it.
I mean, interestingly, we talked about Michael Heseltine, one of a rare group of business people in government. I mean, a lot of people will hear things like gut instinct and I'll go, yeah, there's a big problem with that. There's a big problem with going with your gut, because actually it means that,
What's your big problem with going with your gut?
Well, you tell me, right? In terms of the other way around, right? The big problem with going with your gut is that a lot of people say, well, it means you're not looking at the evidence, you're predisposed towards a decision. You're not seeing the risk, you're only seeing the reward. It's the complaint that's made about a lot of entrepreneurs, right? Is that they're seen as actually so focused on the mission that they miss the context, they miss the nuance, they miss all of the things that I'm sure will be explained to you in terms of the complexity of decisions. It's sort of a lot of people will sort of like almost overwhelm you with the detail. How do you? I'm just interested in your response to that, right? In terms of people that might be listening and saying, "Oh, well, this is what gets you to." It's kind of the excesses. It doesn't get you to the insights. And I'm a fan of gut instinct. I'll put that on the record. But I'm interested in your case for saying how this gets you to better outcomes.
It keeps things moving apace,
right?
Because you're acting on a gut instinct. I think you are. You're less likely to get lost in fucking flowery diatribe, because you're acting on a very common sense basis. And I think that there's a potentially a danger in gut instinct. Well, obviously, there's danger in gut instinct if you're a complete arsehole, so there's a danger there. But there's also a danger if you don't have certain things, I think, that tether you to the ground.
Right.
And things that tether me to the ground are things like fairness, and that beats deep, deep, deep in my heart, and it's in the bottom of my stomach.
Right.
And so some of those principles and some of those things that I care about and that I hold dear inform my gut.
So they provide almost like a decision-making lens.
Yeah, it's like I've got a lens on my gut. I don't know if that's a weird thing, but it's sort of like that, or a sort of something which stops the worst excesses of bad behaviour or weird places where your gut might go. But also, and this is absolutely true, I've got an extraordinary world-class board supporting me. I've got an extraordinary world-class team.
So people that will speak their mind.
Fucking great kids. Yeah.
Right.
So
it's a good trinity.
It's a great trinity.
Right.
And with all of that, so it's not like I'm some weird maverick that's going off doing, not all the time anyway, but you're not doing that. I think sometimes people use gut as a sort of, it's dangerous, as you say, it doesn't look at the evidence, whatever. All I'm saying is that instinctive sense you have about something, it's important. And I think people who deny that, well, fuck, I don't know.
Sometimes, the case I've made is that I think it's the courage to lead, it's the courage to make a decision, it's the courage to actually, and I think a lot of what you talked about there in terms of the momentum, the speed, the movement, actually, that's how you push things along in difficult positions. I want to move us on to fair growth.
Yeah.
Give me a definition about what that means in the context of your day-to-day work in the Thames Estuary.
So fair growth is really important to us because it's clear that there are some, as I've said earlier, some really severe pockets of deprivation on the estuary, and just chucking money at them isn't going to cut the mustard. So for us, fair growth is making sure that we listen to those voices properly, and we don't just go, "What do you say? Oh yeah, shit," and then move on. Like, listen properly and authentically. That we amplify those voices.
Right.
That we make sure that investors, when they come in, hear those voices.
What are the sorts of things those voices are saying?
Well, I'll give you one example. So we looked at a part of the estuary, a town in the estuary, and a whole set of presumptions had been made about what that town needed to pull Dave, and Dave's a real person, out of poverty. Presumptions, yeah? When we spoke to Dave, which we did, we knocked on his door in a polite and respectful way. And the first time, to be fair, David told us to fuck off, which was absolutely right. With David been excluded for economic activity all his life, we're perfectly reasonable. But Dave rang us back the next day. We paid Dave for his time, which was also right. And what transpired was that Dave had skills, so we didn't need a new college, but the job that which was available was over there, and Dave had neither a bike nor a car, and there was no bus, so it's transport. Now, that does not mean that I'm going to just race out and buy a bus for Dave, because that's probably not commercially, viable service. What it does mean is when we have investors in the estuary, or we talk to the Freeport, we can say, do you know what? If you want to be fair and accessible in terms of the skills and jobs you're talking about, think about public transport.
Right. So, and that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because sometimes investing in one place can have very, very profound sort of consequences elsewhere, both positively and negatively, like give people the ability to move. And of course, they're going to use that to find work and do things. But you've also got a series of, I suppose, targeted areas. You've mentioned the Freeport, but I'm thinking about sectors like green hydrogen, like river freight, creative industries. I mean, there is a sense of, I suppose, curation on the estuary as well, in terms of the sorts of industries that you're seeking to bring in for, I suppose, our specific requirements of this century.
Yeah. So don't forget, there was a huge amount of work done. The 2050 Growth Commission, which Michael Hurstein started, was concluded by Sir John Armitt. So there was a huge amount of work done, which sort of said, what are the likely priority sectors? What are the sensible things? But interesting at that time, because it was really, really only an emerging technology at that time, hydrogen wasn't mentioned, yet we know that's important on the estuary. So I think it's a case for us of a sort of all of the evidence work that was done, but also keeping an eye to the future and recognising that some things are moving more quickly. And we, I like to think that we're a very agile and nimble business. We're able to respond very, very quickly when new opportunities or new sectors arise.
Yeah. I mean, it must be so phenomenally interesting to sort of, like, on one level, to sort of think, well, actually what you're doing is having such a profound effect. So, whether it's helping people's lives be improved, whether it's actually inward investors that don't even know that they're going to find the Thames Estuary, that actually that's going to be a thing that is going to lead to jobs that haven't even been created yet. I mean, that must be.
I know.
I mean, that's an exciting job, isn't it?
I've got genuinely the best fucking job in the world. I genuinely have. And what's lovely is that I don't know. Like, I know now, like sitting here with you, I now know that there are a whole raft of young people growing up who will have loads more opportunities growing up than if we hadn't been there.
Yeah.
Because I don't know who they are. It's not important. That's not remotely. It's not important. Any of this is recognised. I just know that it's fact. And that, like, what else would you want to do?
Yeah.
Like, we're making this. I hate it because you start talking about this shit and you sound like Mother Teresa. And I don't mean that, but it's like, genuinely, the Thames Estuary Growth Board is not only making a huge contribution to the national economy, it's doing it fucking fairly. And that is a breathtaking journey to be on.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm also thinking that, that is, I suppose, an organisational output, but there's also what you stand for in your life, right? Because what we started this story off was a person that had been written off, right? That actually you got a teacher that was sort of like holding you up as this sort of exemplar of how not to do it. And I'm thinking, there'll be a lot of people that find themselves in exactly that same situation at that same very vulnerable age, where actually it's the most dangerous moment, isn't it? Because it's a kind of fight or flight moment, isn't it? For a lot of people, that can be just devastating. And for some people, it's the catalyst that actually creates that moment of change. I'm thinking, what would you say to people that are listening to this in terms of that they may be going through their own difficulties? What are the things you might say to yourself, actually, if you were to look back at that 17-year-old, the advice you'd give yourself in terms of the what comes next and how you make the most of the opportunities that sort of afford themselves to you?
That's such a nice question, and it genuinely makes me cry, because I think I'm so lucky to do what I do. I'm so lucky. I fucking love my job. So lucky. I think, looking back, I probably should have punched Mrs. Waits before I left the school.
And I believe you'd have done it.
Yeah, I fucking would have done. I would have done now. So that's probably one thing. I think the thing that is also, which I probably still need to tell myself on an almost daily basis, is sort of, it's okay to have come from nothing. Because it's really easy to think, oh, everyone's really clever and I'm not.
And I think that's it's a very moving answer, because it's the thing about how we make our way in the world, and actually how we sort of find those moments that make us. And do you think, I mean, just, a lot of what we've been talking about today has been about, I suppose, what they call officially social mobility, right? It's about the ability to make your way in life. And I suppose for a lot of people, they were thinking, we need a lot more Kates. We need a lot more people.
That'd be a fucking dangerous place to go, wouldn't it?
I was going to say, well, maybe not. I don't know.
It'd be chaos, man. It'd be chaos.
But I suppose a final thought about, I mean, do you think it's getting easier in this country now, or is it harder?
To do what?
To start, I suppose, what do they call it in the States? The American dream. I'm just thinking about, there's a great Holly Johnson song called Americanos. You can grow up and be president. That was that was the line, right? In terms of like a British dream. I mean, is this kind of, is the work you're doing, do you think it's a constituent part that makes that a bit easier?
I really hope so. And I really hope, I made a informal offering to government last week. I think some of the stuff we're doing on the estuary, it's important to take that to other parts of the country. I think there's some stuff that we've learnt about and that we do that I think might not just help some of the kids in the estuary, really get a proper crack at the whip, but maybe in some other places too.
Kate, thank you very much for joining me on Changemakers.
Oh, dream. Thank you ever so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Cheers.